like that he said that. Plain and simple.
Is it a vote loser?
But
Is it a vote loser, Amanda?
There are going to be some people who would say, I don't like that he said that. That bothers me.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable, too.
And now return to the subject of JD Vance, Donald Trump's choice of running mate for the November US presidential elections. We spoke about him extensively during the news review earlier on. Well, the Times' Will Pavia has been out and about in Middletown, Ohio, talking to the forgotten Americans Vance claims to represent. That's where Vance grew up, as detailed in his best-selling memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, that launched his political career, which explained how he made it from Middletown to a graduating class at Yale Law School. Will Pavia, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Hugo.
Lovely to have you on. But before we get into Vance himself, tell us about Middletown, Ohio. What's it like?
Well, it's a small town about halfway between Cincinnati and Ohio, and it used to be a steel town. And the reason that JD Vance's grandparents and many other people from Appalachia went there was when they were going through sort of grinding poverty in Appalachia after the Great Depression. A lot of people drove north. One fellow told me that his grandparents used to say that when you ran out of gas, you stopped. And Middletown was apparently on the way. So some people went to Detroit, to the sort of car manufacturing places there. But quite a lot of people went to Middletown, and they settled in this steel town, and they worked in the steel mills, and they found a better life there.
And is it today? I mean, how affluent, how deprived does it feel at the moment?
So it has the look of a sort of faded industrial town. So there are sort of in the centre, you've got a sort of high street that's full of these sort of rather grand old brick buildings that have sort of blank faces at the bottom of them, where a shop would once have been. And then you've got these sort of rather kind of, you've got some parts of town that I have to say are very affluent and very look quite wealthy. The place that he was from, he's from a sort of quite large suburb, sort of small houses. A lot of them have been redone and they've repaved the roads, but it's sort of, I would say, lower middle class, kind of working class kind of area. But it didn't seem like an area that was terrifically deprived. I spoke to a councilman from Middletown who said that it's the steel mill is expanding and they're building arc furnaces and there are more jobs. Everyone seemed to say that you could get work if you wanted it there. And I also heard people who said this whole story is phony. This is right. Not a terribly deprived place. This is just a forgotten suburb of America.
Wow. I mean, what did they make of Vance himself then? Is there great pride in him, or is there, as you say, a bit more skepticism?
So a lot of people, especially on his street, were quite proud of him, and sort of talked about it as this sort of great American story that you can come from anywhere and go anywhere. I think a lot of people also sort of couched it fairly carefully and said things like, well, he was telling his story, in other words, because there is a slight sense that he might have sort of tarred Middletown. The only reason that he heard of Middletown is it's this dreadful place that he escaped from. So there were people who said, well, everyone has a personal story, and there were also people who said, look, we knew that there were lots of drug problems around. And also that his story was true. Lots of people knew his mum. They knew his grandmother was this incredibly sort of fiery character who kept him on the straight and narrow, and also seemed to have kept everyone else on it too. So I think there was generally a good deal of sympathy for him, and I suppose pride that he might be the next vice president. There was plenty of Republican voters in town. Butler County is quite a conservative area. I met quite a few Democrats on his street, I must admit, but there's a sort of, I would guess, a mix of people there. And I mean, a lot of people said to me, I don't agree with his politics, but I really like the book.
But yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the book seems to be quite different from his politics, particularly lately. Look, he wrote in the book, Americans call them hillbillies, rednecks, or white trash. I call them neighbors, friends, and family. But he also sort of castigates people who live in places like Middletown, saying that their own culture is holding them back and they lack discipline and all that kind of stuff. Was anybody cross with him about that?
Yes, there were one or two people I spoke to who and I must say less so in Middletown, but certainly in Jackson, Kentucky, which is the sort of the spiritual home for JD Vance. It's where his grandparents came from, and it's sort of in one of those very, very poor kind of Appalachian hill towns. And I remember I spoke to one lady who said, I got about a few pages in and I just put it down because I got so angry. And she was like, I read books, she said.
Wow, I mean that works in both directions, doesn't it? As a critique, yeah.
But I spoke to someone who sort of said, this was clearly a political story. I must admit, this fellow was a politics professor, and he said, he said it's a sort of, a diatribe against working class Americans seasoned with a dose of Fox News. I mean, he felt that it was a very political book. I must admit, I didn't think that reading it. I mean, he's obviously a conservative, and he's got sort of conservative politics, and he believes in sort of self-reliance, and he thinks that government interference might be a bad thing and that sort of thing. But there's a very clear reason that he thinks that in the book, which has to do with, he might have been placed in foster care.
Yeah.
And, so it might have had a direct effect on him. But yeah, there were people who felt that, he was appropriating a sort of poverty that didn't really belong to him, and sort of using that. And
look, before I let you go, Will, what do you make of him now? Like the figure he cuts now, do you see him as somebody who's because the big debate with him is basically whether he's striking a pose in order to win the approval of Trump and Trumpists, or whether we're now seeing his real colours. And which way are you on that?
I find it very confusing, I must admit. I mean, it does seem sometimes when he's talking about Donald Trump, and when he's appealing to Donald Trump's voters, it does seem to sort of cut against the message of hillbilly elegy. I mean, there was a moment at the convention where he talked about his grandmother having 19 guns stashed around her house, and everybody cheered and chanted USA. And if that anecdote had been in hillbilly elegy, I think it would have been a negative thing.
Yeah, of course.
We are sort of these people who are too aggressive and overly defensive, and we, it's stopping us from advancing in the world. But at the convention, he sort of cast it as this wonderful thing that she had all these handguns, that were fully loaded, that were in her silverware drawer. So I do find it a little bit confusing. And I suppose it is possible that he believes, actually, and this is sort of what he said, that he says that he looked at Trump and, like many other people like him in 2016, and saw the style and were repelled by it. But actually, once he was in office, they actually rather liked the economic reforms and the sort of slightly more isolationist foreign policy. And so, they see Trump almost as a sort of means to an end, which I think sort of squares with what he said originally when he didn't like Trump, that maybe he was a means to an end as well. Yeah. So I suppose you might see him as someone who's allied himself to Trump because it's politically expedient. He certainly did that in order to win the Senate in 2022. And how comfortable is he in a Trump administration? I do find that tricky. I think he seems to think that intellectually there's a justification for it, but we
better leave it there, Will. Thank you very much indeed, Will Pavia, and it's a fascinating piece and fascinating to hear about. Thanks very much for joining us. That's Will Pavia there from The Times.
In one term, he has already surpassed the legacy of most presidents who have served 2 terms in office. We are deeply, deeply grateful for his service to our nation.
Well, here in the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer gave this response this morning.
I respect the decision that he has now made. Not an easy decision, but a decision that I know that he will have arrived at, taking into account the best interests of the American people. And I look forward to working with him for the remainder of his presidency.
Well, let's speak to the Sun's senior reporter in the US, Anthony Blair. Anthony, good evening, good afternoon.
Good evening, Darryl.
The momentum that Kamala Harris seemed to build last night, Anthony, doesn't seem to be slowing down, does it, today?
No, absolutely. And as you say, we've seen a lot of key Democrats kind of fall into line so very quickly behind Kamala's campaign, Nancy Pelosi being just one of them. And Kamala's campaign raising this record amount of money, so over $81 million in the space of 24 hours, in the first 24 hours of her campaign. So it is shocking how quickly so many Democrats have fallen into line, although some, such as Barack Obama, are yet to expressly support Kamala, or express their direct support for Kamala, which does indicate that there is a little bit of a divide within the party still.
Yeah, that is interesting. He did remain neutral last time, didn't he? I think as well, up to a point. So I think that is really interesting and worth watching to see if he does make a move. Just on the issue of Nancy Pelosi, how significant, Anthony, is that endorsement?
I would say it is fairly significant. She is sort of the kind of really what now that Biden especially is kind of stepping aside. She is the sort of the elder stateswoman of the Democrat Party. And there is a sense that she was kind of pushing a lot of the momentum for Biden to step aside. And so her early support for Kamala's campaign, I would say, is indeed pretty significant. I suppose the key thing will be is whether the Democrats in some of these crucial swing states then also throw their support behind Kamala, because they are going to make all the difference come November.
And as you say, Anthony, follow the money. Front page of the Times tomorrow considers the amount of cash that seems to have flowed to Kamala Harris's campaign since the announcement last night.
Absolutely. And, this is now over 100 million in 24 hours. And as well as the sort of grassroots money that's been quite striking, we've also seen a lot of key Democrat donors, including the Disney heiress, suddenly free up these tens of millions of dollars, which were being held back while Biden was still in the race. So there is a sense that, both the sort of a lot of the grassroots of the Democrats and a lot of the kind of big money donors that do make politics move in America have both very quickly kind of swung their support behind Kamala.
I had a really interesting conversation on Times Radio on Saturday night with somebody who's been sort of studying the way that money flows from Silicon Valley into politics. And they were talking about these big ticket, these big leaders, Peter Thiel being one of them, Elon Musk, of course, backing Donald Trump, how the energy and the cash seem to be flowing in his direction from somewhere like Silicon Valley. And they made a really interesting point, which was that doesn't necessarily, that's the story. And so you come away from that story thinking, gosh, it's in the bag for Donald Trump. He's sewing up their endorsements and he's sewing up their cash. But actually, there was a sort of underbelly of high net worth individuals who wanted to support the Democrats, but felt it was hard to do so publicly whilst Joe Biden was presumably going to be the candidate. And it's fascinating to watch that happen, Anthony, tonight. That sort of blockage appears to have been wiped away, and the money starts to flow again.
Yes, there is a bit of a sense that a lot of senior Republicans, even though this has been talked about for weeks ever since Biden's rather disastrous debate performance, there is a sense that a lot of the Republicans have been caught on the back foot, because a lot of the arguments that they've used to sort of trash Biden, most notably his age and his kind of instability, shall we say, can now be turned directly back against their own candidate, because, Kamala has, compared to Trump, a lot of youth on her side, and she's seen as someone who's maybe more palatable to a lot of say suburban parents who may otherwise be put off by some of Trump's more extreme kind of MAGA followers. So yeah, there is a sense that while a lot of the kind of maybe big business of Silicon Valley is still kind of supporting the Republican Party, there is a little bit of a groundswell of this is wrong-footed, a lot of strategists on the Republican side.
It's interesting how sort of perceptions and narratives play into politics in general, but particularly American politics, it seems, particularly presidential American politics. Just very, very briefly, JD Vance has been out on the campaign trail, his first solo speech since being chosen by Donald Trump as his running mate. What have you been hearing from him today?
Well, so JD Vance gave his first real speech since the RNC, when he was obviously selected as the VP pick. And his speech, I wouldn't say made any particularly huge waves. He made some rather strange joke about Mountain Dew that didn't go down particularly well. And there is a little bit of a sense that maybe Vance was the candidate that was best suited to fight Biden, because he was, he's from Ohio, he's from the Rust Belt. He could best challenge Biden in his kind of perceived strongholds of sort of middle America. He gave the speech most notably in Middletown, Ohio, which is where he grew up. But the Republicans will have to change their strategy to face Kamala. And we've seen Trump today say, oh, I'm happy I'm facing Kamala. But,
Okay.
They will have to change.
Okay, Anthony, thank you for your time.
As a childless woman myself, I'd say I don't like that he said that. Plain and simple.
Is it a vote loser?
But-
Is it a vote loser, Amanda?
There are going to be some people who would say, I don't like that he said that. That bothers me. But then again, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made it infinitely more difficult for me to be able to put food on the table, a roof over my head. Rent's gone up. I can't afford to buy a house because interest rates are so high. So I think that James Carville said it best, 1992, Bill Clinton's chief strategist. It's about the economy, stupid. So you can make stupid comments. I certainly don't appreciate that comment.
Amanda Mackey, who's a former advisor in the Bush administration, a former Republican strategist. Hello to you, Amanda.
Good morning.
Welcome to the program. Can I just ask you first for your thoughts on this opinion poll there in America where you are, which has got a lot of attention here. It's by Ipsos, the pollster, and it shows that Kamala Harris is, at least on this one national poll, 2 points ahead of Donald Trump. Now, look, that's within the margin of error. It is just one opinion poll. We know that in the end, it really comes down to what's happening in swing states. But on what you've seen so far, including that poll, Amanda, do you accept then that you've got more of a fight on your hands now that Biden has stood aside?
Well, that's one poll, and every other poll that you'll see shows Trump actually beating Kamala Harris within the margin of error, but still beating her. As the pollster for President Trump came out and said yesterday, she's going to experience a bump. There is going to be a rise in enthusiasm in her base because there hasn't been any at all. It's been flat because it's been Joe Biden, gaffe after gaffe, mistake after mistake, falling down, things that obviously anyone would say, is this guy really up for the job? And so they are excited to have someone, of course, much younger, and someone that is going to bring that enthusiasm. But I will tell you, CNN, certainly not conservative, this morning has a poll out showing that among 18 to 24-year-olds, typically a very liberal group.
Yeah.
In 2020, 56% identified as Democrat, now 49% in 2024. Compare that to Republicans. In 2020, 39% of that 18 to 34 age range, 18 to 34 age range, 39% identified as Republican, now 49%.
Yeah.
So a 10-point swing up for Republicans. Again, a CNN poll, certainly not a conservative organization.
Sure.
So I think that there's going to be a gap, but right now she's feeling a bump because of the enthusiasm that the Democrats didn't have that now they do.
Right. I mean, there's a certain element of pick a poll, isn't there, at this stage of the game? I'm looking at another poll, a CBS poll. CBS poll. I'm sure you know about this one. It says that among young voters, as 18s to 29s, you got Harris on 62% and Donald Trump on 37%, which is quite a big margin. I was asking though, do you accept that the fight looks tougher now after the switchover on the Democratic side?
No, and I'll tell you why. It's because we don't know who her vice presidential candidate is going to be. We also don't know that she is not going to have a fight on her hands in the convention. This is still an open convention. I mean, she is acting as the heir apparent, and they're certainly portraying her as the heir apparent. However, you still have to go to the convention, and the convention is still open. And the big donors, the kind of mega donors, as we call them in the United States, they will have a say. And you're bringing up polling. That's a good thing because these polls are going to matter. And where these polls are 2 weeks from now, 26 days from now, when their convention is, the Democrats' convention is, these polls are going to show, can she beat Donald Trump and JD Vance? And if she can't, there will be a fight on their hands in the convention.
Oh yeah, if the polls are looking grim at the time of that convention, the story is going to be transformed yet again. I just wonder what we got in prospect here. Have a listen to this. I'm sure you've heard this and seen this maybe more than once, but this is Kamala Harris at her rally in Milwaukee last night.
As a prosecutor, I specialized in cases involving sexual abuse. Well, Trump was found liable for committing sexual abuse. As Attorney General of California, I took on the big Wall Street banks and held them accountable for fraud. Donald Trump was just found guilty of fraud on 34 counts.
Now, maybe, Amanda, you've had to sort of grit your teeth through that clip more than once before talking to me. But you see the campaign theme there for people listening who aren't that familiar. It's going to be about the prosecutor, Kamala Harris, taking on the convicted felon. And look, maybe you feel the courts in America are part of a conspiracy against Donald Trump. But what I'm putting to you now is that if this election's about Donald Trump's character and not about Joe Biden's fitness for office, that's going to be tougher for your side.
So two things. One, she's also sided with child abusers, sexual predators. And so her record will certainly be exposed by the Republicans. So she can talk about those high notes that she wants to portray against Donald Trump. I would tell her tread lightly going against Trump. There's a reason why Trump is the nominee amongst a pool of very, very highly decorated candidates like Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador. So he won in large part those primaries handedly, easily, because he was in front of a courthouse almost every day, dragged into courthouses across America, throughout America, because of district attorneys, Democrats who had an agenda. And look where he is now. Almost all those court cases have been thrown out. Yes, he was found convicted in one, but all of those cases have largely been thrown out. And there's a reason why he's as popular as he is right now. It's because of what they believe. If the government can do it to Donald Trump, they can do it to you and me. And that's scary for Americans. So I would say be careful about that.
Right. Okay. We're getting a good sense of how you're approaching these challenges. And some of those cases are still in the air, very much in the air. But I want to just put one last question to you while we have the time. Donald Trump's new running mate, JD Vance, your vice presidential pick, he made this comment. I'm sure you've seen this before, but he made this comment on 2021 on Fox News.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
Amanda, what do you think? I mean, I know this is back in 2021, and water's gone under the bridge since then. But childless cat ladies, that's not going to please too many American women voters.
As a childless woman myself, I'd say I don't like that he said that. Plain and simple.
Is it a vote loser? Is it a vote loser, Amanda?
There are going to be some people who would say, I don't like that he said that. That bothers me. But then again, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made it infinitely more difficult for me to be able to put food on the table, a roof over my head. Rent's gone up. I can't afford to buy a house because interest rates are so high. So I think that James Carville said it best, 1992, Bill Clinton's chief strategist. It's about the economy, stupid. So you can make stupid comments. I certainly don't appreciate that comment. However, if it comes down to me being able to put food on the table and a roof over my head and gas in my car, that's what I'm concerned about as an American.
All right.
I think the more clips of JD Vance like that circulate, it may not change the mind of Republican strategists who didn't like what he said, but there are a lot of women across America who probably didn't care for either Trump or Biden, who are going to hear that and think, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I will just go vote for Kamala Harris, because the other, this is just reinforcing how extreme the Republican Party has become. And it's, whereas Trump could have had a more of a consensus Republican choice who could have appealed to new voters, this just reminds voters of everything they don't like about Trump and his brand of politics.
Last week, it was all about JD Vance, the senator from Ohio, who was revealed in Milwaukee before our eyes as Donald Trump's running mate. Went down a storm among the party faithful in Milwaukee. Now there's a view that, I don't know, is he yesterday's choice? It showed great confidence on Donald Trump's part to choose JD Vance, who's more Trumpite than Trump in so many ways, goes down so well with the base. But is he now the guy to reach across to those who need converting? or to the undecided American voters who may well decide this election, especially now that Kamala Harris is managing to, I don't know, solidify and spread that Democrat appeal. And there are serious questions being asked about JD Vance, about that, the liabilities as well as the assets in JD Vance. And here's one. Let me just point this out to you. It was a clip from 2021.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
So that's the Donald Trump's running mate, labeling Kamala Harris in the category of people who he described as childless cat ladies without a stake in society. Maybe not the best chosen form of words when you pull them back from 2021 and lay them out before American women. I'm guessing not too many of whom are going to be very pleased by that. Certainly Amanda Mackey, who I also spoke to a short while ago, the Republican strategist, she didn't seem too impressed.
As a childless woman myself, I'd say I don't like that he said that. Plain and simple.
Is it a vote loser?
But,
is it a vote loser, Amanda?
There are going to be some people who would say, I don't like that he said that. That bothers me. But then again, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made it infinitely more difficult for me to be able to put food on the table, a roof over my head. Rent's gone up. I can't afford to buy a house because interest rates are so high. So I think that James Carville said it best, 1992, Bill Clinton's chief strategist. It's about the economy, stupid. So you can make stupid comments. I certainly don't appreciate that comment. However, if it comes down to me being able to put food on the table and a roof over my head and gas in my car, that's what I'm concerned about as an American.
So that was the Republican strategist Amanda Mackey doing her best to move on from that comment, which is being played and shown all over social media right now. Sabrina Siddiqui at the Wall Street Journal there in America. When you hear that clip now, and it's getting a lot of play, Team Trump must be sitting there thinking, oh my word, I wish that had not happened, mustn't they?
You know, I think in general, you know, one thing that you raised when you brought up JD Vance is that it was a decision that was really born out of confidence by former President Trump and his campaign. They were coasting when they chose Vance because it was in the aftermath of President Biden's disastrous debate performance when this conversation was raging within the Democratic Party over whether Biden should step aside. And then, you know, there also was an attempted assassination on former President Trump that, you know, helped galvanize a lot of support in his favor. And so they didn't really think they had anything to lose and felt like we could just double down on the so-called MAGA brand that has defined Trump and his time in politics. And I guess double down on the working class white voters that comprise of Trump's base. Now you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against Kamala Harris. And so it goes back to what we were saying about needing to appeal to voters who are more middle of the road, suburban voters, college educated white voters, independent voters. And also, you know, there's, I think, not risk someone who's going to energize the Democratic base. And I think the more clips of JD Vance like that circulate, it may not change the mind of Republican strategists who didn't like what he said, but there are a lot of women across America who probably didn't care for either Trump or Biden, who are going to hear that and think, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I will just go vote for Kamala Harris because the other, you know, this is just reinforcing how extreme the Republican Party has become. And it's, you know, whereas Trump could have had more of a consensus Republican choice who could have appealed to new voters, this just reminds voters of everything they don't like about Trump and his brand of politics.
Right. I mean, I'll tell you what, there were a lot of eye-catching contributions floating around on social media, as there always will be. I mean, with George Parker and Kate Ferguson sitting here, I just want you all to listen to this. This was Liz Truss, who's been intervening in the American election campaign. She was asked on Fox News if she thought America had a problem electing women.
No, I don't. I think there have been some brilliant American women in politics, but I don't think Kamala Harris is one of them. She was given the specific job of sorting out immigration on the southern border. It is now at crisis point. She has not delivered as vice president, and she's got the job now because of the crazy situation with President Biden retiring at the last minute, even though everybody in America knew that he was not up to the job. So she has got the job. She's got the nomination, or she's about to get the nomination, in what is a very, very bizarre scenario. What I hate is identity politics. We shouldn't care if somebody is an ethnic minority. We shouldn't care if they're a woman. We should be caring about, can they do the job? And she is not proven as vice president she can do the job. And I think we are going to see a situation similar to what we saw in the UK. I think there will be a landslide against the incumbent party because they have not delivered for the American people.
Well, that was a thumbs down then from Liz Truss, who didn't seem too impressed with Kamala Harris's record of political competence. George?
No, I'm sure the Americans will be delighted to be taking advice from Liz Truss on the issue of leadership and political competence. I love it when she goes on air on American TV stations. She's always captioned as UK Prime Minister September to October 2022. It's one of those damning captions I've ever seen. I mean, it's funny actually, Liz Truss obviously sees her career now as a sort of media commentator in the States. We hear very little of her back in the UK now. Of course, she lost the seat at the election.
Yeah. God give us all the skin, the thick skin that Liz Truss obviously inherited.
Yeah.
Life would be a lot easier, wouldn't it?
It is a curious feature of etiquette and protocol in America, that once a prime minister, always a prime minister. A president is always addressed as president, a prime minister as prime minister, an ambassador is always ambassador, and a governor. So maybe Liz Truss can enjoy that.
Yeah, she's exactly always long-running prime minister in one country at least.
Yeah, I should say that while we are speaking, I've got an eye now on the live picture feed from Congress on Capitol Hill, where in just a moment or two's time we're going to be hearing the address to both houses of Congress from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There at the Republican side's invitation. He's actually, with this appearance on Capitol Hill, outdone Winston Churchill. I think he only got 3 invitations. Benjamin Netanyahu is about to rack up his 4th. And as I speak, the members, the senators, the Congress members are on their feet clapping as the Prime Minister's party come into the room. Still with us, Sabrina Siddiqui at the Wall Street Journal in America. Important speech this, isn't it, for Netanyahu and for the course of this debate over Gaza, Sabrina?
It is, and I think what's notable is that there are a lot of domestic politics at play here in the U.S. surrounding Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, and there are actually dozens of lawmakers, including some Democratic leaders, who are boycotting the speech because of how Netanyahu has waged this war, disagreements over Israel's conduct in Gaza with high civilian casualties, obviously widespread starvation, and even a sense that he has not prioritized the release of the hostages who are being held by Hamas. He has no plans. We've heard from a lot of lawmakers who say he has no plans for post-war Gaza, and that this is ultimately a speech that's more about his own political survival than it is about the direction of the war. Yes. So, I think that it's a speech that's happening against the backdrop of much more questions than we've seen in the past surrounding the U.S.-Israel relationship. But I also think that there's not changing much in terms of the U.S. policy toward Israel and support for its war effort and the decision to continue supplying aid and weapons to Israel. But it shows you just how much, especially in an election year, the politics around this issue have changed. When support for Israel was once widely bipartisan and sacrosanct, now a lot of Americans are questioning the nature of that relationship.